Christian, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, great to be here.
So let's start out talking a little bit about copper. I like asking the various CEOs of copper companies their perspective on the copper market. What's your read on the copper market right now?
Look, I think there's a lot of positive signs. The fundamentals have been really well understood for a long time. And in our opinion, we are likely in the early stages or in the foothills of what looks like the next secular copper bull market.
So let's talk about Hot Chili, a pretty big copper project you guys have in Chile. What can you tell us for our audience who's new to the story, doesn't know anything about Hot Chili? What's the high-level overview?
Look, high level, we're a very advanced developer. We're holding a top 10 undeveloped copper resource in the world and one of the few projects that is available and capable of producing around 100,000 tonnes of annual copper production. Currently, there are 6 projects scaled like that in the development space globally. We have one of them, and this is outside of the control of the majors. So we're positioned with a very advanced asset on our final timelines to advance this towards project financing. So at this stage, we're developing a pre-feasibility. We're about 2.5 years out from a financing decision to build a major copper project.
How long have you been working on the project?
Look, I founded the company back 16 years ago, and we've been listed for 14 years. So we've had a very, very long period to consolidate a billion-ton coastal resource asset that we built from nothing, from the end of the last copper cycle through a very, very deep and long trench in the copper price cycle to emerge with a project that now is one of the first in line projects for new production that will be meaningful at the end of this decade. So, the key things that make Costa Fuego and what Hot Chili is doing differently are the low risk elements. Most of the market knows that this is one of the lowest elevation projects in the global copper pipeline from a scale perspective. Most of our peers are up at 4,000 meters altitude. We're down on the coastline next to infrastructure. And so it's one of the lowest capital intensive projects in the pipeline. So that is really reflected, that low risk element. And at this conference, what we're very, very pleased to be announcing, which just went to the market, is the launch of Huasco Water. And this is effectively the transfer of the company's water rights that we've been developing for over a decade on the coastline to advance Costa Fuego into production on our copper project. But now it's taking those water assets into a new company that can be utilised to supply not just Costa Fuego with water, but also water to the entire Huasco region, because we're in a very unique position that after 10 years of permitting, we control the only maritime concession for the Huasco region in this part of Chile, a very water-stressed area of the world where you're no longer able to extract continental water for new projects. So that is a very exciting thing that we're talking about at the conference.
So are we talking about a new type of royalty?
No, it's our maritime concession, our easement corridors, our surface access rights on the coastline, all of those assets that are unique to Hot Chili. We're the only holder of a maritime right to extract water from the ocean. All new water supply for mining is via desal in the Atacama now. And it took us 10 years to secure those assets. So in February, we announced a concept study to the market at the end of February. And that outlined about a 4,000 litre per second customer base within this area from all of the neighbouring major undeveloped projects from mining alone. And so since that point, we've been engaging with major infrastructure partners globally that primarily have interest in financing, building and operating and supplying water to ourselves, to our partners in the joint venture of Huasco Water that we just announced, Chile's largest iron ore miner, CMP. And what this is effectively is a potential business that supply both salinated water or salt water to projects such as Hot Chili that benefit by using seawater for processing, but also all of the desalinated water supply that has been identified in the region for which we have the only licenses to be able to supply. So what we've got is a situation where the government of Chile is promoting multi-user water businesses to be developed for shared infrastructure. There's a growing trend for the outsourcing of the construction of that infrastructure and the supply of water in long-term contracts. This is primarily a private business. One of the largest growth areas in the world for desalinated water supply is in Chile. And what we're looking to do is supply not just our other peer projects around us, but also the communities of the Huasco region. So that this is a partnership with the supply of water to the communities. And what this really is probably the next generation of how mines are actually developed. Without water, you don't have mining. And if we can socially responsibly develop assets where we're preserving continental water sources, where you can look to outsource industrial infrastructure to major global parties that build and finance these types of things. And if you can bring that together with off-takers, then you can generate things that save multiple billions of dollars for all of the participants, bring forward even larger revenue streams of production, because at the moment, in the current copper cycle, none of these projects will be able to participate without water access. Maybe with 10 years of permitting, they will be able to in the future. But at this stage, the water for Hot Chili is an enabler to the entire Huasco region outside of securing water for our own requirements for Costa Fuego. So it's a very, very exciting project that we're also looking into.
So when I look at your stock price performance over the last year or 5 years, it looks like you guys have underperformed copper quite substantially. Why do you think that the stocks had some pressure on it?
I think probably it's important to know where you are, and our chairman, Nikki Adshead-Bell, she's a capital markets expert. We just spoke about this in a recent webinar, actually. It's important to know what space we're in. We're in the large copper development equity space, and the large copper development equity space, as well as really any copper equity space globally, has not performed that well in relation to the copper price, and depending on which time frame you want to discuss. So if we looked at the last, say, 2 years, for instance, Hot Chili's been the second best performer on the TSX and on the ASX in our peer group of copper developers. So firstly, I think that part of the question is why aren't the copper equities performing well in a rising copper price environment? And I think it's got a lot to do with, where we have come from and where we're going. We've had many false starts. The global copper price, or the copper price has made a few runs, and this latest run has taken us to record highs. Copper prices of $5.20, retweeted to $4.30, back up at $4.68 today. So I think that we are in a very strong copper price environment. I think that generalist money hasn't arrived. A lot will hinge on what happens with interest rates that will be announced in the US shortly, and we'll see where things are going in terms of global economic growth. But in terms of the response of copper equities to copper price, it would be wonderful if the two were tied exactly. But what I do know is that probably all of the fundamentals are there for copper price going a lot higher. And at a particular point, most boats will rise in that tide. And then it's about which boats are positioned best to rise most. But, Hot Chili's stock price, certainly I'm a CEO that wants to see it more reflected of P/NAV ratios that are in line and are not at discounts to the valuations we look at. But we're quite a unique company in that we're from the ASX, and our primary listing is in the ASX. And when we look at ASX valuations, they significantly underperform North American market valuations. And so that is why we're dual listed into the TSXV, and why we're putting a significant amount of effort into our North American relationship building. The recent very successful capital raising that we completed was heavily weighted towards new institutions in Canada and the US. So we're certainly working on that and are aware of it. But, Can we perform a lot better? Yes, I'm anticipating that is where our future goes if we continue to see strong copper price environment.
Now, we can't talk to a copper developer without bringing up what happened in Panama, especially when we're talking about Chile and we see what happened with lithium. And we have to ask, how big of a risk is it if I'm an investor watching and I need to get comfort with Chile and the idea that they're not going to try to come in and nationalize this project or put some really onerous government demands or environmental demands on the project? How do I get comfort with that sort of political risk that exists within Chile?
Yeah, well, look, and we would say it would be our contention that your Hot Chili represents not just a low risk project and meaningfully sized and near term, but a big part of that low risk is the fact that we're in Chile, is the fact that we're on the coastline of Chile, in the middle of infrastructure, in one of the third largest mining countries in the world, that is consistently rated alongside Australia and Canada. And so I would probably put that level of risk, because you can never remove risk from what you're asking from any country. But I would probably put it in the basket that Canada and Australia sit. You're dealing with the number one economy in Latin America, and you're dealing with a country that has actually, probably encouragingly, just went through a period where it's went to a left government with Boric. It's had a constitutional discussion with the population, and almost all of that has shifted the tide back to probably very conservative fiscal arrangements. And so, I think that the constitutional vote getting voted down from the government of Chile is a very, very important step. I think probably what Chile has done is restored a lot of confidence in the taxation environment of Chile, which was also just passed. So probably now, I think the pressure now goes back onto countries like Canada, like the US, like Australia, that haven't had that discussion as recently. Australia in the last cycle, if you recall, had the first discussion in trying to introduce a super profits tax, and Canada followed suit. Now, Chile didn't follow Canada and Australia at that time, so probably maybe in the last cycle the question was being asked of countries that perhaps the perception is lower risk at this point in time. So I'd probably put Chile in that basket at the moment.
Okay. Last question for you. If I'm an investor and I'm trying to comprehend what's happening here, my understanding is you guys are working on a pre-feasibility study to be completed in the second half of 2024.
Correct.
But if I'm a retail investor, I want to know, when would we be looking at production on this? And also, I think the world needs, like you said, this is a top 10 potential copper project in the world, and we need those. Realistically, if everything goes swimmingly, at what point are we talking about you guys starting to pour some copper?
Yeah, simple answer, we're targeting 2028. Late 28 is where we're currently have the puck. At the moment, completing the pre-feasibility, most of that work stream is really well advanced. So that's looking on track for the end of the year. And then we're into bankable next year. 2-year period to get to that project financing decision at the end of 26. So that is where our time frame is. And you're right, if projects of this scale are to come, then they need finance and they need to be able to navigate, what is already a difficult pathway through final permitting and approval on EIA submission, which will be next year for Hot Chili. They need to be able to be funded well. So, our recent funding has allowed us to be able to push down on the accelerator pedal of all of our development. And so, yeah, it's very much a sprint to the finish line now, as you say, to bring this really low risk coastal range production hub into production before the end of the decade.
Christian, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, no, it was great to speak.